Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. Before we jump into today's case, please don't forget to click subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my new videos. So in today's case, we're going back to 2003 to revisit the disappearance and murder of a 19-year-old indigenous woman named Sonya Ivanoff. Sonya, who was born on April 13th of 1984, was one of 6 children and would be described as fun and goofy by her friends and family. So Sonya actually grew up in a very small community, almost like a village, called Unalakleet. I am so sorry if I've butchered that, but the village was located in Alaska and it had a population of just under 700 people. But in 2003, the year of Sonya's murder, she was living in a different town called Nome, so this wasn't too far away from her hometown. And while the community in Nome was a little bit bigger than her hometown, it was still relatively small and tight-knit. To date, the community in Nome has about 3,800 people, and it was the type of place where everybody kind of just knew one another. Sonya had actually moved to Nome a year prior to her murder, so in 2002, and she was really actually well known in the town for being a good basketball player. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of small towns are really big on sports, so a lot of the people in the area just knew who she was. So in 2003, Sonya was now 19 years old and was really focused on trying to build her own life. She had moved away from her hometown to move into this new community, and while living in this new community, she was working at a place called Norton Sound Regional Hospital, and this is where she would work to try to save up money so that she could fulfill her dreams of going to university in Hawaii. And while living in Nome, Sonya would share an apartment or a home with her best friend and roommate and fellow Native woman Tamer Tawarak. Sonya was really enjoying her independence in Nome. She was enjoying her work life and living life as a young teenage girl. While Nome was certainly nowhere close to being a big city, it was definitely known to the younger crowd in the surrounding communities as a place where people would go to party. What's strange about this place is that it has a bad reputation of people from the surrounding communities coming in to party and then going missing. Apparently, there are people who have been reported missing and have just never been found, and that this is something that's been happening for several years. There's a lot of mystery surrounding this community, and there aren't clear answers as to why so many people have gone missing there, although there have been rumors of UFO involvement or perhaps a serial killer living in the town. But anyways, back to Sonya. On the evening of August 10th in 2003, Sonya and her roommate would go out to have a night out with their friends. Unfortunately, Sonya would never return home. On August 12th, Tamer, who is Sonya's roommate, would contact the Nome Police Department to report that Sonya was missing.
She was quite concerned, and she wanted to file a missing persons report. Emery told me that on the night of August 10th, they went out to a friend of hers for a beer, but Sonya was not feeling well at all. She was going to walk home, and so she left Timmery about 1 in the morning. And that was the last time Timmery saw Sonya.
Tamer did return home herself a short while after Sonya had left and noticed that her roommate wasn't back yet. She did think that this was a little bit odd because Sonya was fairly responsible and would typically, leave a note or a call if she wasn't going to be coming home. But there was no note or call. And Tamer, while she was a little bit worried, was kind of just like, oh, maybe she'll show up in the next few hours. I'll just see her in the morning. However, in the morning of August 11th, Tamer gets up and, she's getting ready for work. And she starts feeling a little bit more worried now because there's still no sign of Sonya. But again, she's just trying to rationalize it in her head. She says, okay, maybe, Sonya just went to sleep over at somebody else's house for the night and she slept in. I'm sure she'll be back by the time that, I get home from work. So then Tamer leaves for work, and when she gets to her workplace, she decides she's just gonna call up a few friends and just check whether or not they've seen Sonya. And she calls a few friends and no one's seen Sonya. Again, she's like, don't panic yet, it's fine, maybe Sonya will be home by the time I finish work. However, this wouldn't be the case, and by the time that Tamer does get home, Sonya's still not home. Tamer starts to become more frantic now, and she decides to call Sonya's family. And when she calls Sonya's family, Still, no one has heard or seen Sonya at all. And on the second day of Sonya's disappearance, Tamara decides to go to the Nome Police Department to file a missing person report. It really just wasn't like Sonya to disappear like this, and when authorities searched her home, all of her belongings were there. Everything was there. It wasn't like she had gone out with any plans or any intentions to not come back. Everything was still there. So authorities determined that Sonya most likely didn't run away, so a search and rescue team started work on trying to find Sonya. Sadly, Sonya's body would be discovered in a gravel pit in an abandoned gold mine in Nome city limits on August 13th of 2003. When authorities found Sonya, they found her almost naked except for one sock, and she had bruises and blood on her chest and on her neck and on her face. But according to the police, Sonya had not been essayed. However, Sonya was shot in the back of the head at close range. And now, instead of a missing persons case, the authorities now had a homicide on their plate. Police started to now review suspects, and one of these suspects that they really started to focus in on was a guy that Sonya was dating for a while, or maybe not dating, but had been seeing on and off. And apparently this guy just didn't have the best reputation in town, but authorities didn't really have any hard evidence against him, and they eventually had to clear him of being a suspect. And shortly after this, investigators actually received a disturbing tip. A woman by the name of Florence Harrows calls into the police department to say that on the night of Sonya's disappearance, she had seen Sonya. Sonya was walking alone on the street, and a police car actually pulled up to Sonya, and then both Sonya and the policeman were talking for a few minutes before Sonya then gets into the car and the car drives off.
Walking on the sidewalk. I said hi to her. I think I said hi back. She looks normal. She looks okay. She was heading that way.
Toward the airport.
There was a police car. He started slowing down. Slowed down, slowed down. He tells me to this other side. And then he turned around. The police officer stopped on the side. She said, "What's going on?" And he started rolling down his window down. They talked something. And she went in. It was shocking.
And so this is when authorities were like, oh shit, who was that and what was that about? They were a little bit puzzled and concerned. Could it have been one of them who did something to Sonya? Well, a few weeks later, on September 24th, a police car, number 321 to be exact, would end up going missing, and the authorities would end up having to search for the stolen vehicle. And now this is when things get really chaotic. So around this time, the policemen in the police department in Nome were all assigned to go and try to find the stolen vehicle. According to a retired officer from the Nome Police Department who was on the case of Sonya's disappearance, Brian Redburn, who's the name of the officer, he was contacted by another police officer who was out searching for the stolen vehicle named Matthew Owens. Matthew had called into Byron to let him know that he was at Bessie Pit, which was a sand and gravel mine, and that there had been shots fired and that there was someone shooting at him, and to come and help ASAP. And so Byron races over to the scene and finds Matthew uninjured, and while he doesn't find anybody else at the scene with Matthew, he does find the missing police car. The car had been broken into, and inside of the car in the passenger seat was an envelope. And this envelope would contain Sonya's ID card, which was missing, and a threatening letter. The letter said, "Pigs, I hate cops. I hate every one of you." And it also threatened officers to back off from Sonya's case. But the Alaska State Police had questions about the incident at Bessie Pit. There were details about what Matthew had told them had happened that just didn't really add up. When they had tried to reenact the scene exactly as Matthew had described it, it would seem impossible for things to have gone down the way Matthew had said it had gone down. It just didn't make sense. So they had their suspicions that Matthew may have staged everything. So Matthew was starting to become a pretty solid lead, and he was actually one of the two officers on duty on the night of Sonya's disappearance. Both Matthew and the other officer on duty were both called in to take a polygraph test. And while the other officer passed the polygraph test with flying colors, Matthew failed miserably. When brought in for questioning, Matthew insisted that he had nothing to do with the Bessie Pit incident and that he didn't have anything to do or didn't know anything at all about Sonya's disappearance. The officer questioning Matthew had told him straight up that basically everything you've told us just doesn't make sense. If all of the details that Matthew had shared did add up, Matthew wouldn't be sitting here right now. He would be dead. He would have been shot and died at the scene of the shooting. However, despite authorities having plenty of evidence against Matthew now, he still continued to maintain his innocence. There was an abundance of evidence, and on October 25th of 2003, Matthew Owens would be arrested. After news of his arrest broke, several women came forward to say that Matthew had harassed them while on duty. Matthew would approach these women while on duty as they were alone, and he would SA them and would threaten to kill them if they ever said anything. Apparently, Matthew liked to tell the women that nobody would ever believe a drunk and active female over a policeman. And while there is no evidence that Matthew had SA'd Sonya, investigators suspected that Matthew had seen her walking home alone and had stopped to proposition her for sex. They suspected that Sonya had refused, and Matthew got worried. Matthew probably realized that Sonya wasn't drunk, and if she had gone in to report him, she would have had credibility and he would have gotten in trouble. So to save himself, he started a confrontation and would end up murdering the 19-year-old. There really was a lot of evidence against Matthew. At around the time of Sonya's disappearance, Matt was spotted burning different items in a burn pit. When investigators examined the burn pit, they found buttons that matched the brand of the jeans that Sonya was wearing on the night of her disappearance, as well as remnants of other clothing that she had owned. On November 4th of 2003, Matthew Owens would be charged for first-degree murder. However, the first trial in 2005 would end in a hung jury and a mistrial was declared. For those of you who aren't familiar with this term, a hung jury is typically a jury with members who aren't able to agree on the verdict after extensive deliberations. Not being able to agree on the verdict would then lead to a mistrial. Sonya's brother Jacob stated in an interview that he knew that this trial shouldn't have been done in Nome. Many members of the jury had actually attended the same church as Matthew for years, and he was worried that there could have been a conflict of interest. Luckily, the trial location was moved later that year, and Matthew Owens would be found guilty of the murder of Sonya, and he would be sentenced to 101 years in prison. In 2007, the Sonya Ivanoff bill was signed into law, and this law mandates the maximum sentence for first-degree murder to any officer who commits a murder while on duty. Matt Owens was a predator and most definitely deserves to spend the rest of his life in jail. His actions have impacted so many women who have had to live with what he did to them, and not to mention the pain that he caused Sonya's friends and family. Sonya's mother even stated that she could have never dreamed that she would lose her daughter to a policeman, and that this really has messed up her ability to trust officers. And it wasn't only just Sonya's family who really started to lose faith in the police, but after everything went down, a lot of people in the surrounding communities started to become suspicious of the police department. The officers in these small communities really had to rebuild the trust with the people of the communities because of what Matthew did. This case was just really sad because this 19-year-old woman who had her whole life ahead of her, she had her life taken away by somebody who was meant to protect her. But anyways, guys, thank you so much for tuning in into another video. Again, if you have any other case recommendations, please drop them down into the comments. They will always be very appreciated, and I'm always looking for new cases to share with you guys. And also, please don't forget to click like and subscribe. It really does help my channel grow and, does motivate me to create more of these videos. Anyways, guys, I hope you have a really nice week ahead, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.